In a move that stunned both sides of the border, Ontario launched a bold and highly unconventional ad campaign in major U.S. markets, not to attract tourists or promote business, but to challenge American tariffs head-on. The campaign was impossible to ignore, with eye-catching billboards and targeted TV spots appearing in cities like New York, Detroit, and Washington, D.C. For many Americans, it was the first time they'd seen a Canadian province take such a direct and public stand on a trade issue, and it quickly became a topic of conversation in both political and business circles. Instead of relying on the usual diplomatic channels or quiet negotiations, Premier Doug Ford's government decided to go straight to the American public. Their strategy was bold. They used spliced audio of Ronald Reagan, the iconic Republican president, championing free trade and warning against protectionism. By invoking Reagan's legacy, Ontario aimed to appeal directly to American conservatives and business leaders, hoping to sway public opinion and put pressure on U.S. lawmakers. The message was clear and provocative. Current U.S. tariffs not only betray core Republican values of free markets and open trade, but also hurt workers and families on both sides of the border. The ads highlighted the deep economic ties between Ontario and the U.S., showing that these tariffs threaten jobs, livelihoods, and the long-standing partnership between the two countries. The campaign's timing was no accident. It launched just as the U.S.-Canada trade war was escalating, with new tariffs being announced and tensions running high. At the same time, a critical Supreme Court case was looming, one that could redefine the president's authority to impose tariffs. Ontario's government knew that public opinion could play a crucial role in shaping the outcome. Ontario's manufacturing sector, especially the vital auto industry, was reeling from the fallout. Plants faced layoffs, production slowdowns, and even closures. For thousands of workers and their families, the stakes were deeply personal. This campaign was more than just a political maneuver. It was a desperate but calculated plea for relief, aimed at saving jobs and protecting communities across the province. It marked a dramatic shift from Canada's typically cautious and diplomatic approach, signaling just how high the stakes had become. Ontario's bold move showed the world that when livelihoods are on the line, even the most reserved governments can take extraordinary action to defend their people and their future. The ad's power, and the controversy it sparked, stemmed from its bold use of Ronald Reagan's 1987 speech, in which he warned Americans about the dangers of protectionism. By invoking Reagan, a conservative icon, the ad immediately grabbed attention and stirred emotions on both sides of the border. Over images of bustling, high-tech factories and hard-working employees, Reagan's voice rang out. Tariffs hurt every American, worker, and consumer. The ad cleverly juxtaposed his words with scenes of today's manufacturing sector, drawing a direct line between Reagan's era and the current economic climate. In doing so, it framed recent U.S. trade policy as a sharp departure from long-held conservative principles, suggesting that current leaders were betraying the very ideals Reagan championed. Supporters of the ad praised it as a timely reminder of the bipartisan consensus that once existed around free trade, and argued it was a sophisticated appeal to shared North American values. But critics, including the Reagan Foundation itself, quickly pushed back. They accused Ontario of taking Reagan's words out of context and misrepresenting his legacy for political gain, igniting a heated debate about the ethics of political advertising. Premier Ford's office responded by defending the ad, releasing a longer excerpt of Reagan's speech and insisting that their use was both legal and contextually accurate. They argued that the message was consistent with Reagan's original intent and that the criticism was politically motivated. The controversy quickly escalated, becoming a proxy for the broader debate over trade policy. U.S. politicians were sharply divided, with Republicans and Democrats taking opposing stances and using the ad to score political points. Secretary of State Marco Rubio went so far as to label the ad foreign propaganda, warning that it was an attempt by a foreign government to influence American public opinion and policy. Meanwhile, some Democrats applauded the ad, arguing that it exposed the current administration's hypocrisy on trade and highlighted the real-world impact of protectionist policies. In just a matter of days, Ontario's campaign had managed to thrust itself into the very center of American political discourse, sparking debate not just about trade, but about the power of political messaging and the legacy of Ronald Reagan himself. President Trump's response was immediate and furious. He blasted the ad as fake and accused Ontario of meddling in U.S. affairs, especially with a Supreme Court case on tariffs looming. Trump's next move, halting all trade negotiations with Canada, declaring, "Canada cheated and got caught." This escalated a provincial ad dispute into a full-blown international crisis, freezing efforts to resolve the trade war. Trump reframed the debate as one of national pride and foreign interference, shutting down any nuanced discussion. For Canada, the fallout was severe. The main avenue for de-escalation was gone, and officials scrambled to contain the damage. Ontario's gamble had succeeded in getting attention, but at a steep diplomatic price. With trade talks suspended and tensions high, Ontario faced a dilemma: pull the ad and look weak, or double down and risk further escalation. Premier Ford chose a middle path. The ad would air through the World Series weekend, maximizing its impact during the Blue Jays-Dodgers games. Afterward, Ford announced a pause in the campaign, framing it as a goodwill gesture to encourage renewed negotiations. This move, coordinated with Prime Minister Carney, allowed Ontario to stand firm, without appearing to capitulate. The pause gave both sides a face-saving off-ramp and shifted the narrative from confrontation to potential compromise. Domestically, Ford could claim resolve. Internationally, Canada signaled readiness to talk. The ad's initial phase ended not with surrender, but with a calculated diplomatic reset. Beneath the ad war, a bigger battle loomed. The Supreme Court was set to rule on Trump's use of emergency powers to impose tariffs. A recent appeals court had already found the president overstepped his authority, threatening the very tariffs at the heart of the dispute. If the Supreme Court upheld this, the tariffs would fall, handing Canada a win without negotiation. Ontario's ad campaign was timed to influence public opinion ahead of the hearing, while Trump saw it as a direct threat to his legal position. In Congress, Democrats used the controversy to attack Trump's trade agenda, while Republicans defended executive authority. The legal fight added another layer of uncertainty to an already volatile situation. As Ontario waged its media war, Prime Minister Carney's federal government scrambled to contain the fallout and protect Canada's U.S. relationship. Carney's call with Ford to pause the ad was just the start. Ottawa also announced a major pivot toward trade diversification, especially in Asia. The upcoming federal budget promised investments to reduce reliance on the U.S. market, signaling a long-term strategic shift. This dual-track approach, open to talks but building alternatives, was designed to give Canada more leverage and resilience. The message to Washington: Canada won't wait forever for a resolution. Ottawa's response was pragmatic, aiming to secure Canada's future while still hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough. The crisis had forced a reckoning with Canada's economic vulnerability and a new path forward. The Ontario ad drama played out as the USMCA, the successor to NAFTA, faced its own critical review. The timing was fraught. The public comment period for the USMCA review closed just as the ad controversy peaked. Trump's suspension of trade talks threatened the entire agreement, raising fears of a return to high tariffs and fragmented supply chains. For Canada and Mexico, the challenge was clear: keep the deal alive while one partner refused to engage. The stability of North American trade now hinged on resolving a dispute that began with a single provincial commercial. The USMCA's future and trillions in trade hung in the balance. Ontario's ad campaign exposed the fragility of Canada-US relations in an era marked by rising populism and increasingly transactional politics. What once seemed like a stable, predictable partnership was suddenly thrown into question, revealing just how quickly trust can unravel between even the closest of allies. Trust was eroded on both sides. Washington saw a breach of etiquette, while Ottawa perceived the U.S. response as outright bullying. The diplomatic fallout was immediate, with both governments scrambling to manage public perception and reassure their own citizens. Rebuilding that trust will be a long and difficult process, especially with deep ideological divides and unpredictable leadership on both sides of the border. Political polarization and shifting priorities have made it harder than ever to find common ground, and every misstep now carries outsized consequences. The crisis accelerated Canada's push for economic diversification, with Asia and domestic growth now top priorities. Canadian businesses are seeking new markets, and policymakers are rethinking long-held assumptions about trade security and economic resilience. Over-reliance on the U.S. is increasingly seen as a liability, not an asset, and future policy will reflect that reality. There's a growing consensus that Canada must reduce its vulnerability to U.S. political shifts and economic pressure. The episode is a cautionary tale. Direct provincial diplomacy carries huge risks, and the U.S. is willing to use its economic power in new and sometimes unexpected ways. For Canadian provinces, the lesson is clear. International advocacy can backfire, and the stakes are higher than ever. As the Supreme Court decision and USMCA review approach, one thing is clear: the old rules no longer apply. Legal frameworks and trade agreements are being tested, and the outcomes could reshape the economic landscape for years to come. The era of quiet diplomacy is over. North American trade faces a volatile, uncertain future. For businesses, workers, and policymakers alike, adaptability and vigilance will be essential as the region navigates this new, unpredictable chapter.